and welcome to another Seed World Giant Views interview. My name is Alex Martin, and I'm the editor of Seed World magazine. And today I'm joined by Barry Prentice, who is the director of the Transportation Institute and professor of supply chain management at the University of Manitoba. As we move on throughout our year, one thing's becoming obvious to agribusinesses, and I think has been obvious for a long time. Transportation is difficult to understand and manage this year. Barry's here today to help us understand a little bit more of the ins and outs. But Barry, before we dive in, let's hear a little bit about yourself and some of the research you do at the University of Manitoba.
Yeah, well, we have a very broad program in the supply chain management. So we look at all aspects of the supply chain, from purchasing to inventory to logistics and economics of transport and all parts in between. I specialize in economics of transport. That's my area of interest. And of course, trains and grains have always been a long-term interest living here in the prairies. So we do research on basically all aspects of the supply chain. But I have looked a lot at agriculture and also perishable products. I find those really an interesting supply chain in its own right.
Perfect. And I figured today we could start our conversation kind of broad, Barry. I just want to hear what you're kind of seeing pop up right now as you look into transportation, specifically for agribusinesses. But if you see anything that we should just know of, we'd love to hear what you're seeing right now.
Well, you can't ignore macroeconomic effects. And we've got some really, what I would call large disturbances that have occurred. The interest rates, the bank rates have gone from 0.25 to almost 4% now, and more is coming, it seems, because we have inflation, and inflation itself a macro event. Plus, we have an overvalued US dollar. I mean, the Canadian dollar has struggled to get to 74, 75 cents against the American dollar. But we've held our own against all of the currencies. It's the Americans that are overvalued. And that's causing its own disruption within markets because goods tend to be priced in US dollars. Now, that's good news for Canadian farmers because we get paid in US dollars and our expenses are in Canadian dollars. So we like that. But of course, this is a temporary situation. It's also temporary because we have a dislocation occurring with Ukraine. And it is a big supplier of grain. Now, the amount that they are, limiting from the market isn't that great, but you have to add to it a huge increase in the price of oil and transport and supply management, or maybe the supply chain costs themselves are at least equal to the price of the grain. So a foreign buyer is looking at not just the higher price of grain, he's looking at the higher price of getting the grain. So there's a lot of disturbances out in the marketplace right now. And adding to everything else, of course, is the disruptions from the pandemic. It takes a long time to work out the changes that have occurred there. The railways tell me they're like the meat in the sandwich. They've got container problems at the port, and then they've got container problems with the receivers who aren't necessarily wanting to release them because they don't have warehouse space or whatever. And of course, these things go back and forth. So I just say it's a very, very unusual time.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a lot of good and important challenges to know about. How are you seeing some of the industry try to work to correct some of those challenges? Because I know a lot of it's long-term challenges, which is difficult to correct immediately.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the industry, I think, is right now just trying to cope. Just trying to make sure they're doing things. Now, grain prices being very high, that certainly helps a lot of the supply chain to weather different problems, but they also have high costs. It's not like it's just the one thing. And these do have longer term impacts because, there is a resistance to higher prices as well. People do cut back, they switch, they do whatever they can to try and minimize those costs or stretch their budgets. So it's not all good. The biggest issue for, of course, our supply chains is volume. As long as you have a crop, then you can probably see money being made. Last year was a very tough year because we had such a large downfall in the actual production. And of course, the volume's not there, you can't make any money. So they struggled last year more than this year. But nonetheless, I think there are challenges out there.
Perfect. I know one thing that I've heard recently in the realm of transportation, Barry, is that there was recently the decision to about a merger of the CP Rail and the Kansas City Southern Rail. Why does that merger matter in the long run for Canada, for agribusiness shippers, etc.?
I think it's one of the most important developments in transportation this decade. And what it means in some ways is a direct link from Canada to Mexico by a single carrier. And this is important. And we don't always appreciate how the railways work, but if you have to hand off your rail cars to another rail line to deliver them, well, that rail line doesn't necessarily have the same concern for the efficient use of your cars. So they may get stuck in the siding, they may not get delivered, they may not get returned as well. And that adds to your cycle times, which means you get less utilization of your equipment. But it also may make you reluctant to even take a shipment because you know that you might just end up losing money on it, given what the other railway is going to do, because they also want their share of the profit too. So buying this rail line, which will connect us literally all the way from Winnipeg to Mexico City with a single line operated by the Kansas City Southern and Canadian Pacific, which will be the new CPKC railway, means that they have the ability now to manage their cars, but also, to send unit trains. And a unit train is only efficient as long as it moves quickly and unloads quickly and returns. It's the cycle times that help you. So that will be important for grain farmers, I believe. This is a merger that hasn't yet been approved, but the odds are so high that it will be because the protests against it have been very weak, mainly because there's no lack of or reduction of competition. It's what we call an end-to-end merger. The CP lines simply link up at Kansas City with Kansas City Southern, and there's no overlaps that are going to be terminated or made redundant. So it encourages more of the shipments. It also has an environmental side. With a more efficient rail line, they'll be able to compete with trucking. And right now, most of the products that are perishables, we think of potatoes and carrots and things, but we never would see those sent by rail to Mexico today. But it's quite possible those could be commodities that we would ship to Mexico in refrigerated containers on the rail line, because they would then be able to control their equipment, which is expensive equipment, and delicate. You don't want to just let it hand off to another competitor and hope they treat it with respect. So, products that we may not even ship right now would be gone. And of course, in the seed business, I guess, seed potatoes would be in that category. I'm sure we ship seed potatoes now to Mexico, but I suspect they're probably going by truck. Well, rail is less expensive. And, it's just a benefit to everybody to have that link.
Yeah, and do you think this is all speculation, of course, but do you think that direct link from Mexico to Canada, Canada to Mexico, can help alleviate some of the transportation concerns that we're currently seeing on the horizon?
Well, it'd be nice to think that. And this is a north-south move. Most of our issues are east-west moves. It's coming through the ports. Now, it is possible, of course, to see some replacement of that. Right now, we send canola out to Vancouver, load it onto a ship, send it down to Manzanillo, and put it back on the rail line to bring it into the crushing plant. Well, with a direct link and a unit train, you could send that canola straight down to Mexico, and wheat as well, the same thing. So to the degree that our trade with Mexico might help, yes, but our supply chain issues are global in terms of their perspective.
That's very fair. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about today, Barry, was talking about a little bit about what's happening with the Mississippi River. Of course, that's a little bit
Yeah.
more of a U.S. concern than a Canadian concern, but I know it's kind of impacting exports for growers. Can you talk to us a little bit more about kind of the issues that are happening with the lower Mississippi River water and how does that impact North American shipping as a whole?
This is really in the category of a bigger picture of climate change because the Mississippi drought or river, whatever we want to call it, I'm not sure we have a term for low levels or anyway, but it's really a function of a drought that's hitting a large part of the U.S. But is it climate change or is that just something that happens every 100 years or so? We could say the same thing about the rains that took out the railways in the Fraser Canyon last year. Is that just an unusual circumstance, or is that something we're going to see more frequently? If it is coming more frequently, this is a real problem that we have to face. Now, the immediate problem, of course, is that the barges aren't able to carry as much, and also some have been stuck, and the rates have gone up threefold. So the it's going to push more grain onto the railways. Obviously, there would be moving by barge. We actually have a speaker coming from the USDA to our Fields on Wheels conference. That's coming up on the 15th of December. It's a free webinar, so if people would like to find out more about that, and they can get it right from a very good source of information. But in talking to the speaker who's coming, and they're really saying, it's unprecedented, the things they're seeing. And of course, it does affect prices for farmers as well in the US, because when freight rates go up, that means that their prices they receive typically go down. And it does have impacts that are quite wide ranging.
Perfect. And then, Barry, I just have one last question for you today. Do you have any final thoughts for seed businesses that are kind of working on firming up their transportation and freight plans for this upcoming year? What would be your recommendation for them?
Boy, it's a really tough thing to provide much in terms of recommendations. A lot depends on where your markets are. Obviously, if you have a market in Mexico, then you might want to take a hard look at this new KC or CPKC linkage that's going to be developing. It's actually in place now. It's just that they're still operating independently. But in terms of trucking, my guess is that a lot of the grain will or seed moves by truck, and those rates are going to depend a lot on diesel fuel prices. I think as the U.S. dollar starts to come back to normal, I would expect to see energy prices go up because they're all priced in U.S. dollars, and so we may end up facing some higher prices for diesel. We are seeing weakening in the truck rates in general, and that's because the economy is slowly slowing down. The problem with the central banks, they want to tap the brakes, but they never know whether that's actually going to lock the wheels or just slow them down. And so we don't know how much of a slowdown is coming. For most economic macro events like that, it's a 6-month lag. So the interest rates we've seen already, we probably aren't going to really feel the impacts until the spring. But in the springtime is when we're going to start to see what's coming out of this. The only thing I can say for sure is that everybody's still going to want to eat 3 meals a day. So the demand for food is not going to change. Their ability to pay for it may, but the demand is going to be there. And a lot of this is going to really depend on weather. My guess is that with high prices, there'll be great encouragement for farmers to plant, fence row to fence row. And as a result, there's probably going to be a healthy demand for seed. I'm sure that's nothing new to the seed growers. Again, it really depends on where your market is, but I would say, book your service in advance.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Barry. I think that's great advice to leave on, even if it's just thinking ahead of the game. We appreciate everyone for watching our Giant Views today, and thank you for tuning in. And make sure to stay tuned for more Giant Views as we start talking to more experts. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.